And welcome to another episode of Your Next Favorite Movie. I'm your host, Josh G. And today we have a returning five-time returning guest. Wow, I didn't know it was that high, but yeah, I think that's right. Please welcome back author Anthony Brownlee to the show.
What's up? I actually didn't know it was 5 times.
I think it's 5 times. I hope I counted that out right, but I think it is.
Man, wow,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
yeah. Outside of my semi-regular co-host Chad and Chris, yeah, you've definitely been on the most. So there you go.
Ooh, okay, I'll take that.
Yeah. So last time we left you, you had just finished editing your book and was sending it off to a cover artist, I think. So what's the latest update
Mhm.
on the latest book?
Um, well, that particular cover artist, um, actually had to find a new one. Um, the one I originally had was having some health issues, so
Oh,
I didn't want to burden him with a book cover. If he's going through something like that. So I actually found somebody on Twitter who, through the writing community who, is a really good artist, and he offered to do my book cover for me. So hopefully within the next few months, everything should be put together.
okay. All right. Now, all these times you've always had this other project that we've never talked about, but this is the episode to give away some. Now, obviously, when you're hearing this about a month ago, you just had the world premiere of this, and I don't know how much you want to say or how much you can say, but tell everybody a little bit about Fredheads, the documentary.
Well, Fred has a documentary. It definitely was a journey. Took 5 years to actually film everything that we wanted, to get put out there, and we finally were able to uh, do the world premiere last Saturday, so almost a week ago. It made its premiere at Whorehound Convention in Cincinnati. It was exciting. It was scary. Um, I mean, there was just so many emotions because we had put so much into it, and we were just hoping that people would get what we were trying to say uh, through this doc. And um, pretty much all the seats that they had were filled, and which really made us happy. And you know once the film was done, we did a Q&A, me and the director and the rest of the crew. And I mean, it was just an awesome time. It was just something that just finally came into fruition, after all this time. And just glad that it's out there now.
Okay, so why don't you tell everybody, like you were telling me, about letting them know how they could reach out and possibly get it to come to their town?
Well, you can always check all of our sites. We're on pretty much all the social medias. Just Fredheads Doc. Um, just drop any location that you think will be a good one. If your town has a cool theater, anything like that, um, that we could just travel to and premiere it there. Um, that's what we've been telling people. We've made posts like just drop your favorite spots to where um, you'd like to see it, or hope that you would want to see it. We're taking anything, so just go ahead and feel free.
And that's just Fredheads on all the social media platforms.
Fredheads Doc.
Fredheads Doc. There you go.
Fredheads Doc.
All right. Well, that leads perfectly to our topic of discussion for tonight, as we're going to be talking about the whole Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So, of course, let's kick it off. We're going back to November 16th, 1984, where it all began. A Nightmare on Elm Street. All right. So, obviously, you came on and did Nightmare on Elm Street last year. That was your first appearance. But for those who maybe didn't tune into that and tuning into this, why don't you tell that famous story of when you first saw A Nightmare on Elm Street?
Well, I first saw Nightmare when I was 5 years old. I was at my cousin's house. There's three of them, and my aunt actually had asked us if we wanted to sit down and watch this movie, and we're like, yeah, what is it? And she wouldn't tell us. So, as kids, we're just like, yeah, we want to see it. What is it? And she pulls out this VHS tape that's been recorded off of HBO. So it's not the actual film, but a copy. How we all used to do it back in the day. Uh, and she popped it in, and that famous opener where you just see Freddy's feet just kind of walking in the boiler room and him just making that glove. I mean, we just had no idea. I mean, at that age, we had heard of Freddy Krueger. I mean, because this would have been around 91, 92. So pretty much all the nightmares had come by that point. And so of course we knew that name, but film wise, like being so young, we had never really seen the films. And I just remember, just within those first few minutes, I was already just freaking out. It got me that fast. That's what I love about Wes Craven. He's really good at capturing his audience, like in that way. And when that movie just went on, like we just sat there, just like kind of like in awe over it. But at the same time, we were so freaked out. But it was doing something to me, the whole time we were watching it. And I didn't know at that stage like what it was doing, but I mean it was really just embedding itself into me. And that's why I'm pretty much just like a geek over a nightmare.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're going to even know more than me because you are the nightmare expert, which is why I recruited you for this episode. But let's give everyone a little background. Let's talk about where Wes Craven got this idea, because he was reading some back then it was newspaper articles, I guess, about these Southeast Asian refugees who were dying in their sleep, hiding coffee makers in their closet, like you see in the film. That was literally what he was reading about. I think it was 3 teenagers. They all died in their sleep, and they were all trying to fight it, scared to go to sleep.
Right.
So that's where the original idea came from. And of course, for those that don't know, the name Fred Krueger, because if you pay attention to the first film, he's not even called Freddy. I don't think. Nancy may say Freddy, but it's mostly Fred. It's mostly Fred Krueger.
It's mostly. I think she says Freddy a couple times, but mostly it is Fred.
Which, of course, and I'm sure you know this, the name of his childhood bully on his paper route, I think.
Something like or him at like just a little bully in school. Which, I mean, that name itself. I mean, it's a strong name. I mean, Freddy Krueger. I mean, it sounds scary. Just
And if you can't buy that, just go back to his not previous film to this, but one of his earliest film, Last House on the Left. The bad guy's name, Krug, short for Krueger. I mean, I know you've seen that. Did you go back and check out like all of Wes's stuff after seeing this? But when was it you got around to his other stuff that wasn't a nightmare?
It was pretty early on, because I know I saw People Under the Stairs pretty early on, because that came out around the time when I first saw Nightmare. And People Under the Stairs was just a different type of horror film. And I love that one from first watch, and that one kind of freaked me out too. And then the other ones just kind of slowly came. I didn't see Last House on the Left till I was probably like a teenager. I probably would not have been able to watch that one at 6 and 7 years old. My parents and family, they didn't mind like us just watching horror films, because it was just fun back then. But Last House on the Left, that was hardcore. So I don't think I would have been able to watch that as a kid, but I did as a teenager. I think it came on TV is how I saw it. I don't think I rented it at Blockbuster or anything. I think it came on TV, like IFC or something like that. So I saw it in its like entirety. And so I like that one a lot. It's dark. It's really dark, but
yeah, absolutely. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. But it's a tough watch though. It's not a pleasant watch. So I guess be prepared for what you're getting yourself into. And then of course we gotta go with the outfit. how he got this outfit, about the man he saw out his window, and like what he ducked
Mhm.
down and waited a couple minutes, and when he stood back up, the guy was still standing there staring at him. Imagine how creepy that
And
would be
like
as a kid.
oh yeah, and I think he said he was like 5 or 6,
Yeah,
and
he was young.
that'd be terrifying as a kid. And he said that the man's face was like so dirty because I guess he was, like a vagrant, that it almost looked like, burnt scars or just something on his face. It just made the man look, you know, kind of otherworldly a little bit because he was so, I guess dirty. And Wester said he always just kind of kept that vision in his mind about, what this man looked like, which, kind of ultimately became, the look of, Freddy Krueger as we know him in the films.
Okay, now here's what I want you to do, because you were telling me before we hit record about this rare deleted scene you have on a special VHS. I want you to tell people that, because a lot of people probably don't know that this VHS has deleted scenes that didn't transport to the DVD and Blu-ray copies, right? Like it's not
Right.
anywhere else but this VHS.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell
I
about
can
all of them. I don't expect you to remember every one, but I know you have one particular favorite anyway.
well, this VHS came out around 95, 96, around the time the Laserdisc came out when they remastered the film for the first time. So this disc holds, or sorry, not disc, but VHS holds the first film, and the second VHS is all the deleted scenes, and there are about it's close to 30 minutes worth of deleted scenes, and I've only ever seen maybe one or two make it to YouTube, which is really a shame because there's so much more, you know, to this movie than people probably have ever thought. And one of my particular favorites is one with Nancy. This would be towards the end of the film when she's in her final dream, when she's calling Freddy out, and she takes off running after he runs into her, and then she's on the ledge of the stairs and she jumps, and when she jumps it cuts and then she lands in her front yard. But one of the deleted scene that was supposed to be there was once she jumps, it's supposed to cut to her being in, well, she doesn't realize at the time she's in the sky, and she's behind blue screen, and you just see kind of like the uh well, you don't see the machines, but they're just releasing like the dust clouds. So it just look like, she's falling down through the clouds, and she just keeps falling and falling, and she doesn't realize like where she is and or how far up she is until the smoke kind of clears, and she's like, hundreds of feet in the air, and then she just screams, and then she lands in her front yard. And I've always loved that. And that was like one scene I wish, they had kept in because it was just so interesting. Um, because, Wes's mind, that thing of, the old wives' tale of, they say if you, fall from a great height in your sleep, then you die in real life. Um, and Nancy obviously didn't, which kind of for Wes to say like, no, that's not what's going to kill you in your dream. It's something else in your dreams that's going to kill you. And I always thought that was like a really cool little like parallel that he, kind of put in there with that. But it ultimately never made it into the film, and it's sad that it's never, actually been released on any type of, disc transfer, any of these deleted scenes. So it's really only the people that have this VHS, you know, really know about it. I don't, and some people may have had it years ago, and when Steve or VHS started, kind of fading out, they may have given it away, and probably don't even remember a lot of them. I actually still watch the VHS when I can still, so I actually, have taken it to friends' houses who still have VCRs and like let them see it for the first time. So a lot of them, it's just like this wow moment, because
Right.
they've never.
Okay, so being on VHS, I guess you don't get anything as cool as like a little commentary to talk about why this didn't make it in, because that would have been cool to have, like hearing Wes talk about it. I
Yeah.
doubt on
Well,
VHS you got that, but
not on VHS, but the laser disc they had the commentary. about it, because during the commentary, Heather even mentions it, where she's I remember I was flying like through space or flying, something, and she couldn't, was trying to remember, and Wes was like, yeah, we had you in the back of, blue screen, and you were falling from a great distance. And um because actually when you watched it on the VHS, the sound is missing. That's the only track in all those deleted scenes where there's actually no sound. Every other deleted scene actually has sound and dialogue, but for some reason they lost the audio track on that particular scene. So I don't know if that's why they cut it, or if that happened later when they rediscovered it around that time. So this, like I said, this would have been around 95, 96.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, like I said before, you told me, I didn't know that exists because I never had this VHS and nope, don't know anything about it. All right. So for anyone that may not know, I'm gonna let you go into because you'll probably remember the details and I do not. Why don't you talk about some of these alternate endings this movie had and what it could have ended, how it could have ended?
Oh, well, they pretty much all end on the same note, but so the one that we all know, Nancy steps on the porch, her mom joins her, and then her friends pull up. She gets in the car with her friends, and then we realize that Freddy is the car, slamming the hood down, locking the doors, rolling up the windows, and then drives them off. And then Marge, Nancy's mother, gets sucked through the little window, uh, through the door, which
Mm-hmm.
always, even as a kid, kind of cracked me up.
Yeah, cheesy
Um,
looking scene for sure.
but so Wes's original ending was that it ended on a happy note because he didn't want there to be any sequels to this movie. So in the first alternate ending, Nancy, gets off the porch, goes to the car, and they all drive off and wave off her mom, and she says, bye mom, and she's Marge is waving them off, but she's just on the porch smiling. And then it just pans to the girl singing the song, and then it ends that way. So it ends on this happy note, but then also this kind of ominous presence of the girl still jump roping. So that's one of them. And one of the second ones is everything starts to happen in the car like it did, but this time all her friends kind of disappear in the car. She's screaming for her mom, and then now you realize that Freddy's actually behind the wheel of the car driving it with Nancy in the passenger seat, which would have been like crazy. Like, if they did that one, like, he's just there's this image of him like on the wheel, and he's just like, because the way they have it is she's kind of like leaned over, so you don't really see who's driving it. She kind of goes back a little, and his head is just facing toward me with that smile that he has. And then like she turns and realizes it's him, and then he's just kind of laughing as he's driving her away in this car. Um, so that was another. And then one ends where Nancy gets off the porch, goes into the car, waves bye to her mom and her friends, and then they're fine. But then the mom still gets sucked through the window. So So that one kind of ended like good for Nancy and her friends, but still ended bad for the mom. So honestly, I feel like if I could have picked any three of those for me, I would have picked that one, just because Nancy gave Nancy that ending, but then like the mom, since she was one of the ones that still couldn't you know get behind the fact that Freddy was actually still alive in this supernatural way, kind of gives that kind of finish for Nancy though. So, because always kind of irked me a little bit, like she really did defeat him, and then like you had the ending, but through the rest of the series, or the and even through the comics, that was just a nightmare of Nancy's that was still going on. She had defeated Freddy, but it was another nightmare after the fact. So obviously, look at it that way from that angle with that ending.
All right. Is there anything you want to say about the original Nightmare before we move on?
That is just like the greatest horror film ever made.
Don't worry,
In my
we'll be
in
doing
my
rankings at
humble
the end. We'll
opinion,
get there.
in my humble opinion. But no, I mean, I will say it's inspired me. Um, I don't think I'd be the author that I am without that movie, because that movie is what made me want to tell stories, because I think it's such a good story. It's more than, you know, it wasn't really a typical 80s horror movie of that time period. It seemed like all the other horror films had a particular formula. Some guy, or, random cases, a woman, behind a mask or in the shadows, chopping kids' heads off, doing this, doing that. But to me, Nightmare was deeper than that. I really don't consider Nightmare a slasher film. Like I said, because it's more deeper than that. That's what I actually almost want to call Nightmare like an early example in the 80s realm of like elevated horror. It's very with a purpose, and you don't have those stereotypical arcs of the characters. These are different characters in this different situation. Um, so it's inspired me for years. I mean, I find myself constantly chasing Nightmare to almost get that same high that I got when I first watched it. It was my first horror film, and
Yeah.
trying to get that high of that feeling, that first horror film that really got me. You know, so Nightmare. It's to me, it's a really special film.
Okay. So, and we'll talk about as we go through these. Do you think eventually it becomes a slasher series? Like not including the first one? Do you think it goes there?
I've actually kind of like debated that a little bit. I mean, obviously we know it gets a little bit, the darkness fades and there's more comedic, tones to it. But even still, there's still this level of elevation to it, because it's dreams, you know, this isn't something you can like run away from or fake your death or, um, call the police about it, or or anything, because it's all up here. Like, you have to sleep.
Yep. No
You
way
know,
around it.
no way around. I mean, you can avoid it for so long, but eventually sleep will catch up with you. And what do you? And to me, that's scary, because I know there are days. I mean, when I think like, man, days when I'm like super tired, and then like, man, can you imagine just being in that situation in Nightmare where you can't let yourself sleep because something's going to get you? I mean, that is hard. It's hard trying to like stay awake when you're like exhausted. I mean, that's why I think, to me, even still, even more, even though, like I said, when it got a little bit more comedic, it, it's just the dream factor. I mean, that's still so real, because everybody has nightmares, you know. So I still, even later on, you know, don't really put too much of a slasher vibe on it.
Okay. And we'll talk through some of those scenarios as we move on. But as we transition each film, I have a little game I want to play. And and I don't expect you to know offhand, but maybe you've looked it up. But I'm going to give you the budget, and I want you to try to guess what this movie made. So we'll start with the original. Came in with a low budget of 1.1 million. How much do you think the original Nightmare made? I know you've looked at these things at least some point.
Yeah, I think the original made about 25K. If I'm not, I mean, well, 25K plus. I can't remember like the exact number, like 25,389. I mean, but I think
I'm talking about overall.
Over. Wait, when it initially opened, or you mean like from then up to like now?
I guess total gross. I guess now, yeah.
Total gross now.
So yeah, I mean it'd be theatrically, but still.
The theatrical. I think it was 25. I'm pretty. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was 25,000.
I know you don't think it's 25,000 when the movie costs 1.1 million.
Oh, I'm totally saying that. I know. I just realized that you said $25 million is what I'm. 25 mil. I don't know why I was thinking 25K in my head. 25 mil.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I'm not letting that be the final guess. There's
Yeah,
no
that's
way
what I was
you
like.
think it was.
Yeah,
That would be a failure. There would never have been a sequel if it made 25,000.
Yeah, yeah. For anybody listening, it's like 1:40 where I am right now. Okay, so
Yep. Me too, but these are my hours, so it's normal.
this is his peak. So.
But no, you'd be pleasantly surprised to know 57 million.
57. So is that counting domestic wise too, or domestic and international?
I guess so, based on the numbers I found. Yeah, I think it's everything.
Okay, okay.
So
That's what I
with
was.
that, a movie that costs 1.1 million makes 57 million. It's the 80s. Guess what? We're getting a sequel. And guess what? We're getting it the next year. So
Oh,
on
yeah.
November 1st, 1985, we get a Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, I haven't talked to you about this one as much. So what's your story on when you first saw this one?
I was 8 when I saw Freddy's Revenge for the first time. I actually had borrowed it from my older cousin because I had a friend who was like staying over at my house and I wanted like, some movies. And I was like, I haven't seen that one. And uh so we got that one, and that one, I mean, it freaked me out at 8 years old. I mean, that opening bus scene alone, and like I was a kid who rode the bus to school, and I was just like, oh my god, like I was so freaked out by this movie, and Freddy looked terrifying because at that point Kevin. I mean, I love his makeup in the first one. That's like my favorite, and but I love part two's makeup as well. I mean, he was like how Kevin Yeager like kind of defined him more. Like they gave him cheekbones and changed his eye color, and you got to see him a little bit more than you did in part one because in part one he was more like kind of like in the shadows, or he would just kind of pop up and you would just maybe like see part of his face. Gives you that eerie feeling. But this one, he was really out more, and he was just terrifying in this film. And then that pool party massacre that freaked me out too. I mean, there was just a lot of just haunting moments in Nightmare 2. I know it's not a lot of people's favorite, but even as a kid, I always liked it, and I think I've grown, gotten even more appreciation for it as I've gotten older. Um, just because of the story of Nightmare 2 and how it came about, and with Mark Patton and his story, and um so I've always liked Nightmare 2. Like I said, Freddy is still very scary in Nightmare 2. Very, very dark, you
I
know.
I argue is scariest in Nightmare 2.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
think so. I think this is the
Yeah.
scariest Freddy gets after this, and we'll get into it. It takes a turn. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think this is scarier than the first one. So as you know, as you mentioned, Wes Craven did not see a sequel. He didn't think it had the potential for a sequel.
Right.
So Jack Shoulder comes on to direct, who I think had done what, Alone in the Dark. Is that right?
So
I think he had
yeah,
done Alone
yeah,
in the
Alone in the
Dark.
Dark. Yeah, for New Lines.
He comes on, and the first thing they want to do is what? Get rid of Robert England. Oh, it's just a guy in some makeup. Well, unfortunately, this isn't a guy in a mask like Michael or Jason. This
Right.
is Robert brought something to that role. And I think the story is what they were filming for about 2 weeks and realized, yeah, this guy he couldn't get the walk down because
Right.
Robert's got that walk like that glove. He makes that glove look heavy. The way he
Hmm.
just lets his arm dip to the side to make that glove
Yeah.
show heaviness on it. And they gave Robert what he wanted because he knew he was the star coming out of a nightmare and he got more money to come back.
Right. They
And
said they didn't even know he was the. I think I heard in an interview that Jack Shoulder had initially wanted Robert, but it was the studio who were
okay, that
like,
sounds right. It was New Line.
no, because I guess because they said his like agency was becoming wise, like because Freddie after the first one was like pretty big, and I think it was like asking for that more money, and but Jack was like he even mentioned it in the Never Sleep Again doc that they had no idea that Freddie was the franchise at that point, even though it was so early on, and you know it's a good thing they got wise to that because I couldn't imagine had they like turned him down and said no, we're not doing this, and then just went with that guy or went with somebody else. I mean, that could have just completely destroyed the franchise.
Oh yeah, completely. I don't think we get any more after this one if they
Right.
stick with that. This one bombs, and
Hmm.
we don't get any future installments. I don't think it happens. So,
Oof.
you know, that's just the way it goes. But you're right. Pool scene, probably one of the best overall scenes in the Nightmare franchise for me. I just love that pool massacre, and it gets there quick.
Mhm.
That movie moves. I forgot how quick that movie moves.
Yeah, it does. It moves. It moves real quick. I will say that to me is one of the. I just say a little. I don't want to say downfall, but just maybe just one of the things that I just like. Wish they could have. I felt like some of the scenes were rushed a little bit in this one. It's like I just remember that one scene where, you know, Jesse and Lisa arrive at the school, and then they find out that uh the coach has been, murdered in the shower, and then like it literally just cuts to another night scene, and then like Jesse's just in bed, just hearing. I mean, I guess in some instances there wasn't like a prelude going into the next scene. It was just like this is happening, but then bam this, and then oh bam that, and. So I do kind of wish it was a little bit more, trying to think of the right word. Maybe just a little bit more put together, I guess is the way to say it. I mean, regardless, it's still a fun movie, and I still love it, for what it is.
Yeah, and I think I see what you're saying, but the movies that come in, and all of these do, well, till we get later, but all of these come in under that 90-minute sweet spot, and that was what the goal was back then.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, it'd be bloated in 2 hours and 15 minutes for no damn reason. But
well, Nightmare 2 is actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's the shortest Nightmare.
that's probably correct.
Yeah, I think it's the shortest Nightmare of all of them. And obviously the longest one is New Nightmare. But I think part 2 was the shortest one.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that, because I do think this was like, I mean, credits are probably starting at like 75, 77 minutes before when credits hit.
Yeah.
But we get one of our all-time favorite dance scenes in a horror movie out of this. I mean, come on. I mean, everybody knows Crispin Glover in Friday 4, but Mark Patton delivers a great one in this.
Yeah, that, and then doing it to that song, like amazing. And I know he like even talked about like how he hated, like he didn't want to do it, like he was just like so embarrassed to do it, and he just said he just went for it. Said he just figured out something to do and just said roll the cameras and just started.
I mean, if you watched Scream Queen, Mark Patton had a very rough time on this whole set. I mean, and I'm sure you know the story.
Oh,
if you haven't seen Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, I think is the full title, but it's a documentary. It's on Shudder. It's out there. Go watch it. It's an incredible story.
Yeah. Very good story about his life.
About his life. He reconnects with the writer of the film, because for the longest time, I always just heard about this one being the gayest Nightmare on Elm Street, when that was the thing to say. Most unintentionally gay horror film ever made, and all this. Turns out it wasn't very unintentional. It was written that way. Jack Shoulder still defends his stance that he didn't see it and doesn't understand it. I don't see how you could not.
Actors that said that they didn't even get it. Like, I think Kim Myers said she didn't get it.
But I think they've come around on it, right? Like in that documentary, Jack Shoulder never comes around on it, and I was like, dude, at this point, you can't be denying it at this point. It's obvious. It's out there. The writer even came around, and him and Mark Patton actually have a meetup in the documentary, so it's worth watching just to see that happen.
Right.
See them Have you seen it? Have you seen that doc?
Oh yeah, I own the doc.
Oh, you own it. Oh,
my name's at the end of the doc as a contributor.
Oh, okay. Why am I not surprised?
One is nightmare related. Got to.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I should have known. I have to watch it again. Just watch for your name now. Now I know that. Well, if you're fancy like Anthony, you can own it and have your name on it. If you're lowbrow like me, just watch it on Shutter. All right, we're back to the game. Let's play it. This movie, it was the first was a success, so this one gets a higher budget. Comes in at 3 million. What do you think this one makes?
Yeah. I know this one made more than the first one. It's just if I'm trying to think domestic and international wise, I want to say maybe about somewhere between 80 and 90 mil. Everything about total gross.
Ooh. You're going to be unpleasantly surprised that it did not make more than the first one. This one drops.
Really? I thought it made more.
Now, it makes 30 million, so it's still 10 times its budget. So it's still a success for these low budget horror flicks, but it actually drops quite a bit from the first. Now, what I don't know is that number I found for the first, around Halloween and anniversaries and stuff, they'll re-release the original Nightmare on Elm Street in the theaters.
Right.
They don't really do that with the sequels, and it may include that money. I'm not sure. That would be my guess.
See, that's why it threw me the first when you told me it was like 57, because I always thought that when it first was released in 84, when it had its initial run, and then to the close that initial run, it was like 25 mil that it had made. And then, like I said, then I know they had re-releases and all that over the years. So that I'm not sure. Yeah, so that I'm not sure of.
Yeah, it could be that. And of course, hot on the success of part 2, we're going to get another sequel. It takes a little over a year this time. So we go to February 27th, 1987, and we get a Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors.
One of the
fan favorites, right? One of the fan favorites.
Yeah, I really love this sequel. It's a really good sequel.
All right, so you always got the good stories. So let's hear. I'm going to be honest. I haven't even said it. Most of these I didn't even see until I got that encyclopedia box set.
What?
I had seen the original and I had seen bits and pieces of other ones, but I don't remember really watching most of these on VHS. I saw a bunch of them on like USA, whether it was Up All Night or or maybe Sci-Fi back then, who knows. On TV, I don't remember seeing any of them on VHS. And then that encyclopedia box set, I bought that right at summertime. I can't remember when it came out, but I bought it at summertime on DVD. And I went up for summer break and I just sat and I watched them. I would watch like one or two each day when I was up there.
That is wild. I would not have like guessed that. I thought you would have seen them like around the time I was seeing them.
I did not. I caught the end of it was either part 4 or part 5 because in my memory of seeing it, I remember Alice being there, but I can't remember the exact scene. So I know it was 4 or 5 just because it's Alice.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't remember what was happening well enough to say which one for sure it was. But let's hear from you because you got the best stories. When did you first see Dream Warriors?
I first saw Dream Warriors. I was about 8 or 9. I was at my cousin's house again. He always had all the movies, and he had it on VHS. And obviously, I had already seen part 1 and 2, so I was really excited. And like I had no idea that Nancy was back in this sequel, and that she was older. She was like an adult now. Trying to help these kids, and like that the minute she came on screen and finished Kristen's line where she just like never sleep again. I was like, just like it feel like this charge go through. It's like wow, like oh my gosh, Nancy's back. And I mean, and then just all the subsequent scenes that happened. I mean, there was for the 80s, this film always gets talked about a lot just because of the technical effects that they were doing that were really kind of unheard of at the time. Now it'd be like quick, fast, and easy to do like some of the stuff that they were doing. But back then, I mean, the Philip, the puppet marionette, with the veins, and Freddy coming out of the TV for Jennifer, um, just so, and the Freddy snake, attacking Kristen. I mean, just so many, technical, special effects that were just really good and like effective. You know, I I was just really kind of captured by it. And I was just loving every minute of it, and right up until the end, because my favorite character of all time bites the dust, which I was just like, did that really just happen? I'm just like, did he really just kill Nancy? And I remember being heartbroken. This young kid, watching this horror movie who loved the first one and loved Nancy and just thought she was just, this badass warrior, who went after Freddy in the first one instead of him coming to her and set up these booby traps. And now she's, become victim. And I was just like, there's no way. I remember actually rewinded it as a kid, thinking that was going to change the ending. Like, wait, what? Like, no, like,
Oh,
I mean, how your kid mind
yep.
thinks, and it's just like, yeah, no, that's what happened.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. That would be heartbreaking. And so obviously this one, Wes comes back, what, like producer? Does he write this one?
Him and Bruce Wagner actually write the original screenplay for this, which I'm a fan of the original script. I
That's
don't know
right.
if you
So
read
that's
it.
the one. No, that's the one you talked about in the original Nightmare episode that I have not
Mhm,
read.
mhm.
So, yep, I'm gonna have you do it again in case anyone didn't listen to that episode but does listen to this. Go through their original screenplay on this thing.
Wes and Bruce Wagner was his name, a young, 20-something-year-old writer who, you know, Wes found, and they wrote this screenplay together because they went back to Wes to ask him if he would, write and direct, but he couldn't direct because he was getting ready to direct Deadly Friend, but he said he could write it. And this script, I mean, for those of you who haven't, it's a totally different movie. Obviously, what's the same is it is about the Dream Warriors. Nancy does return, um, but there's so much that's so different. In their original script, Nancy is not a psychologist. She's basically on this mission trying to find her dad, who's been missing for several years now, pretty much since the first one. And while she's kind of like driving, everywhere, she happens to stumble upon Neil Gordon, the doctor, which in the original screenplay, his name is Neil Goldman. And he, but he really kind of takes a liking to Nancy like right away. And a lot of the stuff that happens to Kristen actually happens to Nancy in this. So Nancy in the original script is almost eaten by the Freddy snake, not Kristen. Um, some of the characters are different. Like Will, his name is Laredo. He's the one who builds the Nightmare House. Taryn is actually a black girl. Um, what was it? Uh, Philip and Jennifer, they're actually like really young kids. They're like 13 and 14 years old in the original script. And I mean, Nancy, she's pretty much how she was at the end of the first one, you know. And so Neil kind of brings her on as like an assistant because he realizes that Nancy's able to read these kids more than the doctors have been because obviously she's been through it and she knows what they're actually dealing with. So he kind of brings her on as this like assistant, and they all just take a liking to Nancy, and she's the one who helps them exact their their powers. Kind of like how she told them in the theatrical version. But I still remember that part in the script where they they're in the dream, and then there's this portal, and she's telling the kids, she said, once we go through this portal, we're basically going to face him, and are you guys ready? And they're all just like, yeah, let's go, let's get this over with, let's do this. um because in this story, they weren't all completely together because Kristen, she actually leaves the hospital several days after she gets there. So she's not in there the whole time like she is in the movie. She leaves and goes back to school, and her peers kind of mock her because they find out that she's been institutionalized. So she's like kind of like this freak now, and her power is really different in this. Like instead of she can bring people in her dreams, but she can use it anywhere. So there's a time when she has them all gathered, and she uses her power, and they land in the middle of her living room while her parents are having a dinner party. And like her dad is actually in this script. Like they're very rich, posh people who all they care about is their tennis, their friends, and like their money. So they're like even worse than like how Elaine was to her in the theatrical version. But yeah, her power, they just literally just land anywhere. Like she just think of something and they'll just land right there. Like literally Freddy's like on their heels and she's doing this. Like he massacres like some of the people at the party, like kills her dad at the party. And if I'm remembering right, kills her mom at the party too. I mean, it's so crazy. And one of the better parts is, I mean, Nancy does die in the original script, but she's not fooled by Freddy's glamour. She knows that it is Freddy, so she's kind of like, you're not my father, when he tries to say like, oh, and they basically fight to the death, basically, and which I thought would have been more fitting if she was going to have to go. I thought it would have been better for her to go out that way, because Wes knew that Nancy would know this already, but I felt like when they, Chuck and Frank got a hold of it, they wanted to kind of do it in a way to where, it was more of a surprise, like, kind of like for, just that fact, like, oh, like, just to get that reaction out of people as opposed
shock
to
value.
Yeah, shock value, as opposed to really following who Nancy really was as a character. So like I said, I would have preferred it, like I said, if she had to go, if they would have followed that original formula that Wes and Bruce kind of created. But I would just tell all you guys out there, read. You can find it on the Nightmare Companion. You can just go through all the films, and they'll have the theatrical script, but you will want that original 1986 first draft script, and then that's how you'll be able to read it. And it's so good. It's so good.
Okay.
And it's dark. Freddy's, I would say he's just as dark or even darker than he was in the first one. And I think if they had kind of kept that Freddy, there's no way they could have made the leap to part 4 where he became more MTV Freddy, because there was no segue how there kind of was in part 3 that kind of led into that. He was just dark. Like this how he was in part 1 and part 2. That's how dark he was in the original draft of part 3.
Okay, yeah, because you're right. He starts to add a little bit of the comedic tone in this one. We're not MTV Freddy yet. We're getting there. But you mentioned a couple names. We have first-time director Chuck Russell coming on to direct this one. Now, the following year, he does the Blob remake, and then he tries to get professional and goes by Charles Russell and goes into The Mask with Jim Carrey, Eraser with Arnold.
Right.
First, and Frank Darabont is who, when you mentioned Frank, that's Frank Darabont, who would go on to direct Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile, create The Walking Dead, which you've talked, or not create The Walking Dead, but create it for TV. TV, right. Yeah. The one who gets that put on TV and become the phenomenon it's become.
Right.
Was it probably one of Frank's writing gigs, if not his first as well? I didn't look that part
up. I think it was. I think it, like I said, if it wasn't his first, it was the one of the earliest.
Yeah.
They done.
This definitely has, like you talked about the effects, it has some creative kills. And much like Jason Lives probably would have been the year before this, right?
Let me see. Jason, yeah, because that came out in '86, and they were filming part 3 in '86. So,
and the reason I make that connection, because you have Alice Cooper doing The Man Behind the Mask, and now you have Dawkins doing the Dream Warrior song. It was back when you had to have that tie-in somewhere. That's why I was making that connection, not out of nowhere. I promise.
No, that makes sense. No, it makes sense. No, that's true.
All right, we're gonna go through the budget, and then we're gonna move on. So this budget is a little iffy, somewhere between 4.3 and 4.6 million. So they definitely, I mean, you can see it in the effects. You can see it on the screen. I hate to see the budget go up and you not be able to see it, but you can see it. I remember the last one made 30 million. What's this one make?
I know this one had made a lot because I remember they talked about it, how they couldn't believe how much it made. And I want to say it was maybe like, and I'm thinking, like I said, thinking theatrical wise, the first and ends, like, I think I want to say like 45 or 50 million. And that was like really big for a film like that at that time.
Oh yeah, especially in '87, and
Yeah.
you were right at it, 44.8 million. So right under
Yeah.
45 million. So there you go. Now you're getting one. All right, you know the deal. That leads us to our next. So a year and a half later, August 19th, 1988, we get A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. So I can't remember if it was this one or part 5, but I know one of these next two, you had a very fun story of a first viewing. But we'll talk about this one first. When did you
Okay.
first see this one?
Okay. That fun you're gonna talk about, that's actually for part 5. So we'll get to that when we do part 5. But part 4 actually saw at my cousin's house again, but this was the other cousins where I saw part 1 for the first time. And we saw it, and I remember even at that age it had that bit of a different feel because Freddy was, had become MTV Freddy at that point, because I believe this was the same year that Freddy's Nightmares came out too. And so he was already becoming like this kind of like rock star, idol, where people were cheering for him more to kill people as opposed to like having like the character survive.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can't remember when Freddy's Nightmares came out, but I can tell everyone that that famous gif of Freddy putting on the sunglasses, it comes from this movie. This is full
Yeah,
MTV Freddy. Yeah. So
for sure. And this, like, they're really bringing Freddy out of the dark in this because he's on that beach scene with Kristen, like I said, with the glasses, or at the school, and there's sun shining. Because up until that point, Freddy's always in the dark, in the night, So they're really bringing him to the forefront in part 4. And I
yeah,
think part 4 is
he
the
must
first
be dealing
time we
with
got
people like
James.
me who sleep during the day.
Yeah,
That's when I would see Freddy's during the day.
we always like watching them at night just to make it more fun, but we will watch them during the day too, just randomly.
Oh, I
But
just meant that's when I sleep is during the daytime. So if I
oh,
was
you
to
mean now?
encounter
Oh, you mean
Freddy,
now? Yeah.
oh no, back then, yeah, I definitely watch them at night. You watch these movies at night. I just mean if I had to encounter Freddy in my actual life, it would be a daytime meeting because that's when I'm doing my sleeping.
But I did enjoy the Dream Master though. Like I said, it was fun, and because it came off of part 3, it really kept that creativity going. And I think they even mentioned that because part 3 really brought that really imaginative aspect of the dreams, or like I said, the Freddy snake and the imaginative kills with the puppeteering death and the TV death. And so this one had some very imaginative deaths. I mean, the kiss of death, that's one of my favorite like death scenes, with Sheila, when Freddy gives her that kiss and like basically sucks all the air out of her body. Oh, that it just gives me the creep, because her body just dries out completely. And just imagine like Freddy's like kissing you and like just like like so disgusting. But I just remember this being, what was it? Debbie's death when she turned into the cockroach, because she has the fear of the cockroaches, that and she's in that roach motel, and that scene where she her arms have fallen off and like they're like bug arms now. She can't really keep her balance and she falls face forward into that goopy sticky stuff that holds roaches, and her face comes off. For some reason, to me, as an 8-year-old, that sticky stuff looked like the cheese on the cafeteria cheese pizza. So like after I saw that movie, I could not eat that pizza for like weeks, because that's all I thought about was that. It
Oh,
looked
it's
like
hilarious.
it just made me gag. Like, I would get people like, you don't want your pet? I was like, no, take it. I was like, no, I can't. They were just looking at me like they didn't understand why. I'm just like, y'all didn't see what I saw. I can't eat this pizza.
Every other kid's looking forward to pizza day, and you're like, no,
Right.
no, no,
Like,
that's the one day I don't want. No,
like,
no, no.
no. And just imagine biting. I was like, oh, no, no, I can't. Like, somebody get this away from me.
Now, this one does have the weird dog pissing fire to bring Freddy back. That
Mm-hmm.
weird scene. It's getting a little. You know what? Something I wanted to mention. Well, one part three, you mentioned it. That's the superhero Nightmare on Elm Street movie. If I want to watch more superheroes, I'm not watching Marvel. I want to watch stuff like that. First off, I didn't mention
Mm-hmm.
that during part three, but I want to ask how you felt getting to see a character like Kincaid come back in a horror movie, because that didn't happen going back then.
No, it didn't. Um, it was, like I said, I didn't understand it too much as a kid, but getting older, then that's when I really realized like how important that was. Um, to have this black character not only survive the first one or the third one and then come back for the fourth. Um, it it was just very progressive, and his character is very memorable. Like, Ken did such a good job with, that role of Kincaid. And I've had a lot of talks with Ken. We're actually a little close. He actually told me for part three who they had, who was like, I guess in the second running, like if he hadn't taken it, or the role was Dwayne Davis was up for the role of Kincaid, and Dwayne Davis is actually in Nightmare 4. He's the one that delivers that line to Sheila and says, "Hey, baby, you're sucking on the wrong nozzle." That
Oh,
guy.
okay,
He's
okay.
actually he was actually the second runner up to play Kincaid in Nightmare 3. And like when he said that, and I was like, I actually could kind of see that, because they both, and I've seen Dwayne Davis and other stuff. He kind of has that, kind of like intimidating presence where he can like be really, kind of strong and strong toned, and so I could really have seen that happening. So um I thought that was kind of cool. I thought it was so crazy. That's one thing that always bothered me about part three. Not the fact, I mean, they, he ends up being the first one killed off in part four, but the fact that they kill the last of the Dream Warriors off so quick. It's so fast, and it's like, they're supposed to be the Dream Warriors, and it's like it's almost like that doesn't even matter anymore. It's just like, oh, okay, well, I felt like a better instance would have been like to have them at least survive halfway through the film, and maybe, somehow, Freddy does something and he ends up offing them, and then that's when Alice kind of steps forward and realizes her place as the Dream Master. Because the way they did it, I mean, it's kind of reminiscent of like what happened to Rachel Carruthers in Halloween 5. It's just kind of like, what, like, coming off this last film, like this is how this character ends. It's kind of like a slap in the face. Like, it's like, okay, I mean, I understand with part four that they were, they were dealing with the writer's strike,
Yeah.
and they weren't really kind of working with full scripts, but I felt like they could have done something to kind of give in those characters more, dignity. Like I said, Nancy dies at the end of part three, but she goes through the whole film and at least has that moment where she's fighting Freddy, even though she's hurt, still trying to fight, still trying to keep going. But with them, it was just like bam, bam, bam. Like, you're going, like, okay, moving on to the next. And
Well, I can't help but wonder if they were able to get like Patricia Arquette to come back, would they have wanted to keep that character around?
I always wonder that too. And I know there's so many stories about like why she didn't come back, and and such. I know she had gotten pregnant early,
Okay.
and and like, and that, and I think she was pregnant around that time, maybe a little bit like early pregnancy or and such. So I think her first son was born at the beginning of '89. So they would have been making, so I don't know if some of that had to do with it, but I know her agency wasn't very satisfied with the script either. and I think that's partially why she didn't return. Because I actually, a random story. I met a guy who showed me his Nightmare on Elm Street 3 poster, and he actually had Patricia's signature on it. I'm like, dude, like, make sure you keep that in like a glass casing or something. I mean, because she's like one person that everybody's missing, from their Nightmare 3 poster. And he told me the reason or how he was able to get it was he said he used to work behind the scenes for Jay Leno in New York City, like, I don't know, like one of the grips or, however the TV shows work or something like that. And she was a guest star on there and he knew she was coming. So he brought his poster and, she signed it for him then. And then he said he had actually asked her, why she didn't come back for part 4. And I think the reason he gave was the fact that her agency wasn't really happy about the script. Like they didn't really care for the script too much and just kind of persuaded her away from it.
Well, that's disappointing, but that's how it goes out there.
Yeah.
Well, this one we bring on yet another different director, this time in Rennie Harlan, who had just come off directing Prison, which is another horror flick. I want to say that one might have been one of Viggo Mortensen's earliest roles, actually. Prison. Yeah, I'm almost positive that's if it's not his first, it's early.
Yeah.
And then of
I
course
still
after
haven't
that,
seen that one fully.
I watched it once years ago. I don't remember much about it. And of course, after this, he turns into the action director with Die Hard 2 and Cliffhanger and Deep Blue Sea. I mean, but once again, here we go. Let's see if this movie is a success or not. It comes in. I tell you what, after 3, they felt very highly of this franchise because it comes in with a $13 million budget, the highest yet.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think this movie brings in?
Now I know this will make more than Nightmare 3. So I want to say this one was like maybe in the 55-60 range mil.
So you're not wrong. It does make more, but it's not that much more. It goes up to 49 million. So it almost hits
40,
50
okay.
million.
Okay.
But of
So
course,
no, 3 and 4 were like the highest grossing of like pretty much the Nightmares. Those were like the biggest ones.
well, that's good. Keep that in mind when we're doing the guessing on the next one when we get there. But before then, we have to go. We're now jumping once again, and the next year they're pumping out another one. So on August 11th, 1989, we get A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child.
True.
All right, here we go. I know you have the fun story for this one, so tell
Okay.
everybody when you first saw this one.
I actually saw Nightmare on Elm Street 5. I believe I was 6, but I saw it in daycare. I know a lot of y'all might be thinking like, what the but it's true. I can't remember to this day who somebody brought that VHS in and they actually showed it to us at the daycare center. And me already seeing like, the first few, I'm just like, oh man, you guys are gonna love this. These movies are so great. I was hyped. And then with it being on VHS, I didn't realize till later that it was actually the unrated version that doesn't get shown often. And again, one of the ones that hasn't been transferred to disc, which it shows more of Dan's death and more of Greta's death. Oh, and I would say Greta's death, I mean, it would probably make the average person sick of what actually happens. So, I mean, we all know what happens. He, stuffs her, to death and then she chokes. But what all was cut, Freddy delivers that Barbie doll on a platter with all the food around it. He slices the Barbie doll's stomach and it's bleeding, but that also makes that kind of, causes Greta's stomach to slice open and bleed. So while Freddy's stuffing her mouthful of all this food and it's going down, you can see it all coming down into her stomach. And then he literally scoops it out of her stomach and then shoves it back into her mouth. So he's basically just shoving like the digested food she's already eaten back down into her throat. And like kind of like at the same time just stabbing her in the stomach and just like really just I was like, oh my God. Like that. I mean, I could understand why they cut that. I mean, for that, especially for, this would have been 89. Maybe today they probably would have showed it more, but I mean, that was gruesome. Like, it was one of the most gruesome deaths in Nightmare, I think. And you can kind of see it a little bit in the theatrical version. If you watch it, the scene where, in that scene where right before Freddy kind of cradles her and act like he's like, concerned and whatnot, but really, trying to get her to choke. You can see her kind of holding her stomach, and if you look closer, you can still see where the opening is where he cut her open, and you can kind of see it, but you don't see it a whole bunch. But if you're looking for it, you'll see it. So if there's a little bit of the remnants left over from that dinner scene.
Okay. That's interesting because I definitely have not seen that. So that is yeah, that sounds gross.
Yeah.
That sounds gross.
Well,
Yeah.
let's say imagine seeing it at 6.
Yeah, really. That is no, I don't want to imagine it. I can't imagine it. I won't imagine it. So what are your overall thoughts on the story of this one with the child and all that, everything that goes into it?
I honestly like Nightmare 5. People always, they rank it as the lowest and say like, oh, it was horrible. But if you really break Nightmare 5 down, it actually tries to go back to the darker roots of Nightmare. I always felt, because if you kind of take out, you know, the MTV Freddy of like, because again, he was very MTV Freddy at that point. If you kind of take him out and just look at the story, it's a very dark story. I mean, first off, you have Alice and Dan, and they're in love, and Freddy manages to kill Dan this time, and she finds out she's pregnant, and then there's this idea of like, should she have this baby or shouldn't she? Because Freddy's using the baby's dreams, and talking about abortion at that time. Let alone in a movie, but a horror movie, and you know the idea of just his mother just committing suicide, who was a nun, and she was raped by all these maniacs in this you know you know asylum for the criminally insane. And you get to see that. You don't really see the what happened, but you see like her being trapped, and how Freddy was conceived. And you know it's a very dark story to me. And it's very, that whole asylum. And you know there's a there's a bit of gothic remnants of it, in that story, just like with the architecture of like some of the buildings that are in there. um I've always thought it was a really good story. I don't know why it gets hated on so much. I mean, people will rank that one over 4 a lot. And I thought part 4 had a little bit more of the comedic overtones than part 5 did, when you're just comparing those two. And then of course Alice's, you know her transition from 4 to 5. I mean, she's really strong in part 5. The fact that she has this choice to keep her baby or not. She makes the choice to keep her baby and just kind of deal with what's going on, because she wants to keep her baby, but knowing that Freddy's going to keep coming that way. But she just faces it. And, she chooses to go into these dreams, and like, she's, I love that she's basically just, badgering, like, I'm not going to let you do this to my son. And like, why don't you come for me? I'm right here. Like, she's very strong in part 5. So I really love her transition from 4 to 5, where she's, kind of really starts off as meek and shy. And, even at the end of part 4, she gets stronger. But, in this one, she's up there,
Okay. So, well, that has me very curious when we get to rankings to see where you put this thing. But as usual, we once again have a new director in Stephen Hopkins. The only thing I could really find before this was something called Dangerous Game, which I'm not familiar with. And he'll obviously go on to do Predator 2, among other stuff. So Rennie Harlan jumped to Die Hard 2. He jumps to Predator 2. They're both jumping to other sequels after leaving their sequels. All right. So the budget drops back down on this one, only to $6 million. What do you think it makes?
I want to say this one made maybe only about 30 million.
It actually drops even lower than that. It
That's
only makes
I thought
22 million.
I actually was gonna say maybe like close. At first, I was gonna say like 25, but I was trying to think like maybe it made a little bit more. But yeah, I remember that one did take a dive. No, I always thought that was so weird how each, Freddy, Michael, and Jason, their part fives are like not the highest points. Like a lot of fans don't like Halloween 5, a lot of fans don't like Friday 5, and a lot of fans don't like Nightmare 5. I said, but their part fours did so well. Everybody loves, the final chapter. Everybody loves the Dream Master. Everybody loves the return of Michael Myers. I said that is so weird how that happened with 4 and 5 with each of those franchises.
You're right. I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. I can't
Yeah.
argue any of those points because, yeah, won't give anything else away because we'll be ranking them soon. But yeah, I agree with you on all points there. Now, even though part 5 did drop, it was still a success, and they made over like what, about 3.5 times its budget. So that's still, but you can tell here they're starting to wane on whether or not they think it could go. Because at the time, they think they're getting ready to make the last one.
Right.
And it takes a full 2 years because it's not until September 13th, 1991, that we get Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare. I think that's the full title.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you know the drill. When did you first see this one? Here we go.
This one, I'm sure I pretty saw early on. Actually, I think I saw part 6 after I saw part 1. I was still pretty young when I saw part 6. And, even as a kid, it freaked me out just because it was Freddy. But as I got older, I realized it didn't freak me out as much because at this point, Freddy had basically become a parody of himself. If you look at if somebody actually took part 1, watched it, and then watched part 6, they would think they're probably watching 2 different movies.
I agree with that.
Freddy was way too comical in this one. I think this one he hit the apex of his, comedy, at this point. And a lot of times the story can redeem itself. Like I said, with part 5, they had MTV Freddy. The story itself was dark, and then they had such dark imagery. But part 6, it almost felt like a cartoon almost. You got him playing, Nintendo, using the Power Glove, and you know, I mean, it. It had some cool like Carlos's, the whole how he was taunting him. I thought that was like a really, kind of dark. Some of the things that were in there a little bit were kind of dark because the kids had their own stories, like Tracy and her father, how he was like molesting her and abusing her, and like Carlos being abused by his mother, and she used to beat him so much that he was deaf in one ear, and then Freddie used that and turned that against him and made him basically gave him like super hearing to the fact that that's what ultimately ended him. So there were some random dark moments that I thought were really interesting for this film, and some heavy moments. The whole thing about with Tracy, and then of course this is the one we find out where Freddy wasn't just after the last of the Elm Street children just for the sake of being after him, but because his daughter was taken away from him once he was found out as the Springwood slasher. So he took all their children away from them because his daughter was taken away, which I thought was a really cool. That's kind of like that Empire Strikes Back moment, the Luke, I am your father moment, where you think it's, it's one thing, but then it turns out like, wow, no, it's really because of this, that, that started this whole thing. And, I thought that was kind of interesting, that they had done that, that he had this long lost daughter. And I thought Lisa Zane was perfect as, Maggie Burrows. She kind of had, those wide eyes, and she had really great expressions. I thought if at that time, if anybody could play Freddy's daughter, I thought like she was like perfect, for that role. So there are like a lot of things that I love, and there's a lot of things I wish that obviously for it to be the last, I wish they had made it darker. I wish they had gone more into the history of Springwood and maybe brought like back some of the past old characters. Maybe bringing Nancy into like Maggie's dreams, trying to help her, or just something, something kind of interesting like that. Um, uh, and then of course the 3D aspect, which I never got to see, the film in theaters, so I never saw like the 3D aspect in that way. And then um, the Nightmare Encyclopedia set, it had the glasses, but I felt like when I watched the 3D on that, it wasn't really that great, honestly. So I mean, I've probably only watched it in 3D maybe like twice, just from that set. And I just pretty much really just watch it regularly um, in 2D. But I do have a pair of original Freddy's Dead glasses from years ago. I mean, it even has the old, trying to sell like root beer on the side thing from it.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, those are like really rare. A friend of mine gave me those a long time ago because she had like a couple pair, and she was like, "Here, do you want this?" I was like, "Yeah." Like, and just where it is in my collection, I'm looking at it right now. It's like right there. So that's where I keep the glasses.
Okay, I think one of the coolest things about this is because New Line at the time really did expect this to be the last.
Mm-hmm.
So they bring on Rachel Talalay, who'd
Right.
been with the franchise since the beginning, right? Like I think she goes back to the first one. They're
Yeah.
like, okay, this is gonna be the last. And they give her a chance to direct. So I think that's just a really cool in-house studio thing to do to give her this chance.
Right.
I remember as a kid, or not as a kid, but probably as a teenager when I first saw this. Oh, this one pissed me off. Like you get Freddy as doing the Wicked Witch of the West.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, Freddy's at his apex with the
Mm-hmm.
comedic shit, and it irritated me as a kid. Now I don't mind as much because I'm like, they're just going for it. They're like, fuck it,
Yeah.
let's go
Yeah.
bonkers, let's just do it. Video game Freddy, Power Glove.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've come to appreciate a lot more over the years, so I'll give it credit for that. But so they we're going to try to speed through these last few.
Well,
So they
real quick side note.
okay.
This is the one that Peter Jackson had wrote an original script for. Of course, who we all know later on went to do, Lord of the Rings. So he had wrote originally, this one was originally titled The Dream Lover, and it was going to have what was it? Freddy had become like a joke, basically, in like Springwood, and like teenagers would literally fall asleep on purpose to go into the dreams just to mock him because he was so weathered down and beaten up that he couldn't even muster anything to like do anything to anybody. So it's like a joke. But at one point, he does manage to act like, I think by chance, kill one of the teenagers, and then his strength starts to come back because then they're like, oh, he killed somebody. So then like that fear comes, and fear is what gives Freddy his power. And then it was supposed to go on from there, which I've always been curious to see how that particular script would have went.
Yeah, no kidding. That is, I don't. If I've learned about that, I do not remember it. So that is very interesting. Okay, I tell you, learn something new every day. That's why I love it. That's why I got you on here. So for this last one, New Line was going to go all out, and they upped the budget. They gave him an extra 5 million. They went up to 11 million. What do you think this one makes?
I want to say it made around the same as Nightmare 5, or maybe a little bit more. Maybe that one hit the 25, maybe 26 mark.
Yeah, it does a little better than you thought, 34.8, so almost 35 million. So it does pretty good. And then 3 years later, Wes Craven comes back to the franchise.
Yes.
And for the first time, we get one of these released in October, on October 14th, 1994. Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Yes.
Now, if I remember correctly, this is the first one you saw in theaters?
No, I actually didn't get to see any of them.
Oh, no, you didn't. Okay.
Until later. So so I've always been sad about that because this could have been one that I could have seen, but we didn't have the internet like we do now to say, oh, this is being real. I mean, so you just kind of had to watch TV and whatnot to figure out like stuff. But as a kid, you're not really looking at all that stuff too much. But
Come on, you didn't get the Friday newspaper and turn to those big page full of movie ads.
no, I was like 9 when this movie was. No, I was like 8 when it was being made, and then like 9 when it. I was like 9 when it came out. So I was like, no, wait, no, I was 8 when it. Yeah, I was 8 when it came out, and then I saw it when I was 9 the next year in '95 because my cousins again had rented it, and that's how I saw it. So I mean, once I went over there and like my cousin, he had seen it with a friend, and then when I got there and he was telling me about it, he said, "Man, you won't believe it." He's like, "It's so different. Like they're playing themselves, and Freddy's supposed to be like real." And I mean, it was really confusing. I was like, "What?" Like so we turned it on, and then of course I'm seeing Nancy, but they're calling her Heather, like her real name. Like what? What's going on? As a like I said again, as a kid, you just don't fully understand like that particular type of writing. Wes always said Wes was very creative, very smart. I mean, that's very smart writing. I mean, for a horror film. I mean, I fell in love with this film at first watch, just like I did with Nightmare One. I mean, I thought Heather did an amazing job. Like it was like some of her best acting like I'd ever seen. And then you got John Saxon back and Miko Hughes playing her son. He was amazing in that part. I mean, and for him to only be like 8 years old to do that, I mean, it was so good.
Well, have you heard the story of how they got Miko Hughes to cry on set?
Yeah, yeah.
Like his dad tells Wes, I have a way I can do it if you really need him to.
Right.
And he goes, he tells him that his mom died, right?
His
Like that's
mom
what he tells
died.
him. Like that's insane to tell a little boy his mom died just because you want him to cry. I mean,
That's wild. I mean, Hollywood it's a strange place.
yeah, it's it's
Oh
it's,
man.
it's a hell of a machine, isn't it?
I
Like I
mean,
said,
there was so many great aspects to this film. I mean, the freeway scene alone. How many horror films, I mean, have shut down the 405, a mile of the 405 to film like this action scene where she's just running across the highway. I mean, that's like crazy action in this horror film. I mean, it's like that's something I feel like you would have seen like an Arnold, like in an Arnold movie in like the '90s or something. And they did it in this film, and then the whole scene of you know Heather having to accept to play Nancy one last time, and that's one of my favorite scenes when she Donald pulls off, and then she's facing backwards against her house, Heather Langenkamp's house in Hollywood, and then she's realizing something. You see her head moving back and forth, and then Charles Bernstein's original music cuts in, and then she turns around really slow, and then she realizes she's back on Elm Street, and that house is there. I mean, it gives me chills. I mean, you just see that pan because you just see all you're seeing is her reaction at first. You have no idea what she's looking at, and then that camera slowly pans, and then you're back on Elm Street. And it's just like like I mean, it's I love that. I love that movie from beginning to end. That movie was so like West. It could be like the only person to come back for like the seventh or the sixth sequel and still make something creative and original
yeah, I
after
mean,
all the sequels.
right, and this is Wes setting up, getting ready for Scream with the meta. This
Right,
is his prelude to that.
right.
So everybody thinks of Scream as meta, as the first meta, but it's this.
Mhm.
This is where he cut his teeth on it, if you will.
Oh yeah. Like I said, Nat, to me, New Nightmare, that was a really early example of like what we see now, like Hereditary, Midsommar, Get Out, and Us. I mean, elevated horror. Like Wes Craven's New Nightmare is definitely elevated horror. Like I don't see New Nightmare as a slasher film at all. I
Oh no,
mean,
I agree with that.
there's so much story and it's so interesting, like very, creatively interesting that this entity that's been around since like the beginning of time has, you know, come around in different shapes and different forms, and storytellers have been the only thing that can capture it. And then in our time, it was captured by Wes Craven. And now that these films have ended, the only form that it knows is Nightmare, or it only knows Freddy. And so when he sees Heather Langenkamp, the actress, he doesn't see her as the actress, he sees her as Nancy Thompson. And you know that it's just so cool. And you see her slowly, to me, literally, I feel like we don't actually know who Heather Langenkamp is, because literally the movie just starts on this workbench. And if you go back and if you jump to the end of the film when Dylan asks her to read him some of the story, she literally says, "We open on an old wooden bench." So basically that's how the film opens. Basically that's saying, so basically we're in Wes Craven's nightmare, because he's writing these down, because these are his nightmares. We're literally in his nightmare. And Heather is in there too. So I feel like at that point, as soon as that movie starts, even though it's Heather Langenkamp, the actress, I feel like she's already dissolving into Nancy Thompson. And to me, and I'm pretty sure he had said this in the interview, that was his way of bringing Nancy Thompson back, because Heather accepted to play her in the real world, which means it brought her back in the fictional world. And I'm like, that was like a really genius way to bring her back. Like, that's how I always look at it. That's when people say Nancy's death, like, she was, but she was resurrected in New Nightmare. And if you really watch it, that's exactly what happens.
Now, let me ask you this. What do you think of the look of Freddy in this one? It's a lot different than the rest.
Yeah. And I really like it because of the fact that it's, in a sense, it's not supposed to be the Freddy that we know. This is supposed to be how the entity has brought himself out as Freddy, because it, like, instead of it being burn marks on him, they look more like open, like wounds almost. I mean, you could tell a little bit, obviously in the face there is a burnness, but like the head part, it's more like open sores, because towards the end of the franchise, like especially with 5 and 6, they really didn't define Freddy's makeup like they did in like I'd say the first 3. This one, it was just a mask that they actually just put on. You could really tell in part 5, it's just a mask, as opposed to like them really like doing like, Robert's face up, and like, or how Kevin Yeager did, with Freddy in part 2, which was very defined makeup, for Robert. So I really like this look. And then he has the long trench coat, and it makes sense, like I said, because we do see the Freddy that we know at the beginning when Heather's doing the talk show. Robert comes out as, the Freddy that, we last saw him in part 6, that, he's like, "Love you, babe, we'll do lunch." And, really hamming up the crowd, and, in this, classic green sweater and this glove, and, or a red and green sweater. I mean, it's the Freddy we know, but then this is now the Freddy that we don't know, that we're getting introduced to. So I thought it was really important that he looked a little bit different. So I thought that was really smart.
Yeah. I will say, I'm glad you brought up the talk show, because that's the one part that I'm like, I realize crowds can get excited for these characters, but would he really have that whole crowd chanting Freddy on a talk show, like a daytime talk show like that? I don't know. It's a little hard to believe, but it's okay. It's okay.
That could have been all Freddy fans. That would have been the one that all the Freddy fans came to.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, if you give me like Arsenio hosting that talk show, I'd be able to handle it better. I mean, he had Jason on. I mean, come on, he can do it.
Oh yeah, I remember that interview. We had Jason on. That one was good. That's probably what Wes was probably trying to think, like, doing this whole Freddy thing. Because Robert was really popular. I mean, that was like no joke. When you saw those kids, like, Heather always said that's the story of her life, where they kind of race past her, or, or she's just kind of waiting on Robert, like, like while he's doing all these autographs, they said, I mean, Robert was really, popular. I mean, like with Freddy. I mean, I was still today. I mean, that just shows, just going to the conventions, his lines are like, people have been waiting in his line like 8 hours just to get to him. I mean, that's literally a full day at the con.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, he's really created this character. And I mean, I really feel like that could have been how that talk show could have been.
Okay. I think with the right talk show, maybe. That particular one didn't look like the one that would attract the Freddy crowd. All right, let's talk about it. This one gets a budget of $8 million. How much does it make?
Well, because Pulp Fiction came out the same time, this one kind of fell at the wayside a bit, which was a shame. And I think this one only came in at about 18 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Very close, 19.7. So yeah, you're right there. Yeah, you're very
Okay,
close.
yeah.
And of course, takes 9 years, and we finally get the dream matchup that had been promised a year before New Nightmare, actually, in Jason Goes to Hell. But it doesn't come until the form of August 15th, 2003, Freddy versus Jason.
And this is technically the first Freddy and Jason film that I saw in theaters.
Okay, so this was the first Freddy I saw in theaters. I did see Jason X in theaters.
I did miss that in theaters.
Oh, you did? You missed that one in theaters?
Yeah, I missed it. Yeah, I knew it was coming out. I don't know what I was doing around that. I didn't see it in theaters.
Nope, I dragged my dad to make me go see Jason X because I wasn't old enough yet. And they were being strict about who they let in. Pissed me off, but
yeah, I wouldn't have been old enough to technically see it by myself either at that time. I think 2001 that came out.
Yeah, something like that. So I dragged my dad, and then I remember at a convention that summer I bought a bootleg of it before the actual DVD came out, and then I bought the DVD when it came out. So I was all about some Jason X. But yeah, Freddy vs. Jason. I was there the Friday night it opened. I went back the next night, and I went back one more time the following weekend. So Freddy vs. Jason, that was a big moment in my theatrical experience.
Just overall. Yeah, I know you love that one.
Yeah, and we talked about it, and in fact, I'm gonna breeze through this one a little bit because we did talk about it. If you want to hear more about it, we talk about it on when we ranked the Friday the 13th films, which was just a straight ranking. I decided to go with a new format for this one, so hopefully it's working out. I'm not sure. We'll see. I like it just talking about each film, and then we'll just go through a quick ranking. I think I like that better anyway. But yeah, they bring on Ronnie Yu, who is mainly an action director, but he had done Bride of Chucky. So he had that, but he had no interest in really any of these franchises. It's not like he had any history with them, which is it's a weird decision to make. It's part of the reason why we don't get Kane Hodder back as Jason after doing it 4 times in a row, because he didn't care. He didn't have an attachment to Kane like the fans did. So I remember being angry about that. I don't know about you, but I was angry about that.
I had heard it was actually the studio, because he said he didn't know anything about. He said from what interview I saw, he said he didn't care who it was, but he said it was the studio mostly because they said they wanted a towering Jason,
which isn't how that shows off when Kid and Kurzinger are in the role anyway. But you're right. That's what I've heard too. But Ronnie Yu, because he's not a fan, wasn't going to fight for it either.
Yeah, he did.
He's not going to put up a fight because he just doesn't care.
He basically just said if that's what they wanted, then that's what they wanted.
Yeah, he just went with it. And as we mentioned on the Friday the 13th episode, this is more like a nightmare film because I think that I'd say this is probably 70% nightmare, and then you get 30% Jason and going to Crystal Lake at the end. I mean, you don't get to Crystal Lake till the end of the movie.
Yeah.
So I'll have this much differently in my rankings than I did on that one because I consider this a nightmare film. All right. So one thing we didn't talk about money though. Now this one is big. It's 2 big franchises coming together. $30 million budget.
Yeah. I want to say this one made a lot. I remember. I think this one made like 82, 84 million dollars.
Oh, you can keep going. 116.
116. Oof. See, I feel like some of that is adding in like the international stuff.
Probably is adding in international, yeah.
Yeah. I think the ones I mentioned are just mostly like the domestic totals.
Okay, you might be right on. I didn't look up just domestic. I just looked up the gross, which is probably total worldwide.
Yeah. So I think domestic wise it made 82 here and then, but obviously a combination of everything, like you said, 116. So I mean, I knew it. I mean, these are like 2 big monsters and horror, and they were the ones that really stuck out. Because if you really think about it, Michael Myers wasn't really dominant in the 80s like Freddy and Michael were, or Freddy and Jason were, because you had part one, 78, part two, 81, and then you don't really get Michael back until 88.
Right.
So by that point, you'd already gone through, four nightmares or close to five. And then, Jason was already up to like seven by that point. So, they were the ones really dominating the 80s.
But
And
I will say, after this comes out and becomes a success, they almost make a Michael versus Pinhead movie because the Dimension owned both of those franchises. I'm reading the
right.
Taken Shape book about all the lost sequels that did
Mm-hmm.
almost happen.
That's
And
right.
yeah, and they almost made that movie. Okay, here we go. You know what's coming. We lose Robert Englund as Freddy.
Mm.
This is the Michael Bay era of remaking these horror flicks. We get
I'm
Samuel
shuddering.
Bayer, music video director, to come on to direct. And on April 30th, 2010, starring Jackie Earl Haley, we get the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. So, when did you see this one? Did you watch it in theaters? Did you just wait for it?
I did see this one in theaters. I was very curious about it just because, and it was easy for me to see because at this time I actually was working in a movie theater when it happened. So I was able to see it for free. And, a bunch of people from the movies like, oh, this is coming out. Like, like, let's all just go see it. So it's like, okay. So I was like, maybe they may do some different stuff, creative stuff. We'll see, um, so because actually I like the Friday remake because it really felt like a Friday the 13th film set in the modern day, which I was like, I actually liked Friday the 13th. Halloween, I thought it was really cool. That first one, kind of taking that backstory and, um, really seeing Michael as a kid and then watching him slowly transform and, taking it from that angle. I thought that was really interesting because we had never seen that with Michael. So I thought, okay, so maybe they'll have something like that with Nightmare, and we'll see something a little bit different. And needless to say, I was very disappointed. Um, I felt like this film, they just basically made it a carbon copy of Nightmare. I mean, they really didn't add anything new. I mean, the only thing that was new were the micro naps, which I thought that was a little cool touch, like, because micro naps are very real, like, with people, and like those very minuscule seconds of sleep that, happen that feel like, minutes to people, but, they don't last that long. I thought that was an interesting take, but as far as the story goes, it was very lackluster. They literally killed off three characters, I'd say, within the first 20 minutes of the film, and you don't see any more deaths until the mom at the very end. And I thought that was very bizarre. Like, how do
Right?
in the first one they were spread out, and there was this journey that went along with it, and you watch, Nancy getting stronger, and then that's what made Nightmare so great was the journey that Nancy had to take, and she was alone. She was the one that became very resourceful. That this 15-year-old girl had to sort this out on her own, figure it all out, and become an adult basically. But Nancy Holbrook, they kept her very meek, and I felt like she was always calling out for Quentin. Like, Quentin, I need Quentin. Where is it? I mean, like, that's not Nancy. Nancy didn't need that. Nancy Thompson didn't need that. She relied on herself. And, just watching her set up those booby traps. And this one just felt really cheap. Especially for the budget that they had, that they could have done it. And then the fact that they said that, oh, well, now we have CGI to make it all better. The scene where Freddy's coming through the wall in the remake, it looks CGI. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it looks fake. And then 84, it looked more real when they just used spandex and lighting. It looked like Freddy was really coming out of the wall, and then he comes back and it's like the wall heals itself. I mean, that looked real.
Yep.
I'm like, CGI did nothing for this movie but make it look even worse. I mean, even part of Freddy's face was CGI, and I'm just like, really? And then they try to make it seem like, oh, he wasn't, oh, it was, they killed him by, thinking that he did this when he really, you know, like they made a mistake in killing him, and now that was the thing. It's like I didn't like that. That thing of like, well, now we have to feel sorry for the bad guy. I'm like, no, Freddy's just always been like this, sadistic. Even when he was alive, this sadistic monster. You didn't feel sorry for him. He was just, you know, how we knew him, the Springwood slasher who turned into something worse after he died. You know, yeah. This film, yeah, the remake just it does not hit any markers from. I mean, I thought the cast was good. I mean, except for Rooney, which I learned a little bit early on why that is. It's because she felt like she didn't feel it. She didn't feel the character of Nancy Holbrook. She actually said in an interview that she went back and watched the original and said she actually liked Nancy Thompson more than she liked Nancy Holbrook because she felt Nancy Thompson was way stronger than Nancy Holbrook. And like, so when she played it, she didn't really feel that compunction. It's like she said, I don't feel the way this is written. I don't feel this. Like, so and it kind of comes off like that. Like, like she doesn't want to do this role.
Right.
And I agree. And she was written very poorly. And the fact that you have a music director doing something like this, I mean, I felt like you would really need somebody more seasoned in film. Preferably somebody in the genre, that can appreciate this. That knows the original films, know what Wes was trying to do originally. And the fact that they didn't even ask Wes to like consult or anything on it was, I felt a slap in the face to him.
Yep.
Like, this was his idea, his creation, and you didn't even have the decency to go to him, as a consultant. I mean, they did that on Last House on the Left remake. They went to Wes. And I felt like that's why I actually liked the Last House on the Left remake. I thought it was a really good remake.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more successful remakes. I agree with that.
Right. And I just think that was just one of many things of why, you know, this film I just did not connect with this remake at all.
I didn't either. It's like they wanted to have good ideas because they tried to make Freddy scary again. I don't think it works.
Right.
Like you said, the CGI. I mean, it takes you out of it because it's so obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're good at it, it's one thing because sometimes you can be good at it, but this one's not good at it, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
They do make him officially the pedophile, which he wasn't in the original. It was always like you always kind of heard that. Like I always thought of Freddy as he was molesting children and then killing them. Yeah. When you go back and watch it, that's not the story. But from what I understand, that was the original story that they had to take out to get past the censors, though.
So, yeah, because there was some story that broke in '84, which I actually found out what story that is. It came on like Discovery Channel, like on the true crime stuff. This stuff in the school about teachers or something or had been molesting children, and there was a huge story like in around '84 when the first Nightmare came out. So it became more subtext, than actually saying like. I mean, because you think a grown man, like a child killer, I mean, that usually is attached.
Exactly.
I mean,
right.
I mean, I know that's a hard subject to say. I mean, but typically it's just not killing children, but you have that other component to it usually. And there's actually a part in part 5 where there's actually papers. Remember, like where Yvonne smacks all the papers out of Mark's hand and they're picking them up. If you look at some of those papers, it actually says on one of those said child molester freed on technicality or something like that.
Okay.
Something. Yeah. So they kind of randomly threw that in there. So, but it's never actually spoken. But there's a section where it's like the bold caption that said "child molester free" or something like that. That was like way later on though.
Right. Yeah. And you brought up the fact that they challenged the fact whether or not Freddy's really guilty or not. I think if you're going to go that route, go all the way and make them have made the mistake that he actually didn't do the stuff. Right. Don't then just back up and say, yeah, he really did do it. We just wanted to put doubt in your mind for no reason. Right. Follow that story through. Make it
Yeah.
that they did it for the wrong reasons and they're in the wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna tease it, go for it. But they don't.
Right.
They just go back to the he really did do all this stuff. And like at that point, then this story didn't matter. It didn't lead to anything.
Right.
There's no conclusion with it.
You're just telling me something I already know.
Yeah, yeah.
I know this is like,
If you're gonna do it, make that change. Have the balls to make that change. Be different. That would have been different.
yeah.
You can
That's
at
what I
least
said. The
respect it
other
a
two
little more.
remakes, like I said, I felt the other two remakes did a really good job at bringing something different. Even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, remake, I thought that one was good. And I just thought Nightmare, they just felt to me just short. They felt way short. And they really could have used this story and like done something really good with it. But it, like I said, they didn't ask Wes to come back, and I really felt like he could have given them some really good key points. Maybe could have like given them ideas he maybe wanted to use for the original that he didn't because of the time period it was in. Like, I couldn't have done this back then, but now because we're in 2009, 2010, maybe we can touch on this or do this or something. But they didn't. Like I said, they didn't even give him the opportunity, which like I said, that's a slap in the face to me. And I'm just like, and at that time, Robert Shea was gone from New Line, which makes sense because I felt like if Robert Shea was there, then Wes definitely would have been like a consultant on that film. But I felt like whoever the new person is up there, just they don't really look at it like how us and like Robert Shea looks at
Right.
the house that Freddy built.
Right.
To them that's just okay. That's a franchise that y'all did. It's back when, so.
But one thing this movie definitely had, and that was they gave it money. So this movie got $35 million budget. How much does it make?
I think this one made like over 100 mil. I'm pretty sure this one made like a lot because I think they said it actually surpassed like the Friday the 13th and Halloween sequels or the remakes, if I'm not mistaken.
It makes just under what Freddy versus Jason makes. It makes 115.7.
Right.
So it makes a lot of money, and I am surprised we ended up not getting a sequel to this just because it was a success.
Yeah, it was supposed to be. So I know they said they contracted Jackie Earle to do 3 movies and Rooney Mara to do 2 movies. So she was supposed to come back at least for 1. So, and I think it may have been the fact because it might have been a commercial success, but I think critically and even like if you think about fans wise, it was a bomb.
That's true. Normally that doesn't matter though. You know that as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Normally, if they make money, it'll still get done, but it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we're at least thankful for that, right?
Yeah, I'm actually, I'm kind of glad they did because I was so disappointed. I don't even know if I would even have like watched it if they had made another one.
Yeah, I didn't even say what my first time was. This came out 4 months after my first son was born, so I didn't even have time to go to the theater at that point. So I think this was like a red box rental or something. I was like, let me just go run the red box, grab something, and I can bring it back and me and the wife watched it. So this was definitely not a going out to the theater experience. So,
Right.
but at least in your case, it was free. So you have that to be thankful for. You didn't pay money for it.
Right. I said that's probably the main reason I did, just because everybody from there like, oh, because we always got to see the movies, a few days beforehand, early. So it was just kind of thing like, oh, let's go to this one because this one's coming out. And it's like, okay. And like I said, and I was curious. I was curious to see what they were going to do with the story, And like I said, I was just very disappointed.
All right, so we have officially made it through all of the films. So now what we're going to do is we're going to rank them, starting with 9 down to 1. We'll go back and forth round robin style. I think we're going to agree on the bottom one. I hope we're going to agree on the bottom one. I'll let you kick it off. Go ahead. What is your last ranked one?
Well, of course, the last one is the remake. For all the reasons, that we were talking about, it just does not hit for me at all.
For all the reasons we discussed, yes, we agree. The remake is at the bottom. It does nothing. We talked about all of them. We're going to speed through this. I thought we were going to agree on the bottom two, but after listening to you talk, we're not going to agree on the bottom two. So go with your next one.
So next one would be Freddy versus Jason. And not that I think that is a bad movie. It's just because it came out later for me. And it's not, like I said, when it comes to Freddy versus Jason, I feel like it's its own entity. It's I mean, like you said, it is more of a Freddy story, but you know, it's so far removed from the ones that we saw in the 80s and even the early 90s that it just doesn't have that feel. So that's why it's always a little bit farther back for me. Like I said, but I love the movie itself. Like having those two characters just duke it out, and I mean, because that's basically what the movie is. That's basically what it's setting up to do, is have them battle. So, and I appreciate Freddy versus Jason for what it is, and that it connects these two franchises, which I love both the franchises. So,
Okay, you're breaking my heart here. You're breaking my heart.
But I give it, I give it love though. I give it all love though.
Well, my number 8, and you talked about it. You don't understand why it gets the hate, but I'm one of those people that do, and that's Dream Child. And look, I think you're able to, as a writer, look at all the good stuff, because when you talk about it, it sounds like a really good story. But when you watch it, I don't think they perform it that well. It's one of those scripts that's really good on paper, and I don't think it transfers to the screen very well. You're able to get a lot out of it, and I can appreciate that. But I just I can't get into it.
Yeah, that's what I said. You and a lot of other people don't really like part 5 much.
Yeah, that's why I said I'm with you on the 4 and 5 stuff. That's kind of how I go. Well, for the most part. But all right, let's go to your next one. Here we go.
So the next one would be Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Just like I said before, but just because it was the most comedic. It's really far removed from Wes's original vision of Freddy and who Freddy was, and just that dark figure that's in the shadows in your dreams and your subconscious, and partially in your waking life, and so it was a little removed from that, and just too much of the comedy played a big factor in why it's more to the bottom for me. But like I said, I can always watch it. I can always watch it and enjoy it. It's very early 90s. It's got that early 90s feel. It's fun. So, but just little too much comedy, not too much horror.
Well, it's funny. I'm gonna. This is surprising. I didn't expect this to happen, but this is where I actually have Freddy's Dead, but for a different reason than what it sounds like, because you're kind of defending why you have to have it so low. And mine is just rewatching this franchise this year. It was a lot stronger than I remember this franchise being. Because I said on our Friday, that's my favorite franchise. It was never Nightmare. Like yours is Nightmare, so I get it.
Right.
So yes, I have it at 7, but I just think it's because it's got strong entries coming ahead. I mean, it's goofy and over the top, but they go for it, and because of that, I can respect it a little more than I used to. Because I don't think I ever would have put it below the remake ever. I don't think I ever would have put it below Dream Child, and it's only just below where it's at because of what's coming next. So go to your next one.
Well, you actually might be surprised by this. I've actually gone just so back and forth, and I keep trying to put it somewhere else. It's hard, but still, as of right now, it's Dream Child.
Okay.
And I know it's kind of, it might shock you because I was just saying how I felt like it was a darker story, but there's something about Nightmare 4 that still just grabs me. That's just like, it's still just so freaking entertaining, and I obviously I found Dream Child entertaining. It was just a different type of entertaining, and sometimes it's hard for me to actually put it into words. I do. It's like some days I go back and forth, like random say, okay, 5 is before 4, and then like the next day, well, okay, 4 is back in front of 5 now. It's like I don't. It's like those two. It's just something that just
Okay.
tweaks at me every time.
Okay. Well, my next is Dream Master, and it's just because I find everything else stronger. I find the
Mhm,
characters in the other one stronger. I know everybody loves Alice. I think she's fine, but
mhm,
and I think this is the better of her two performances. I see what you're saying about 5, but I like her better in this one. We
mhm,
get her early enough on, it works for me. Yes, you get MTV Freddy with the shades and everything else that we talked about, and we get
mhm.
the whole people on a pizza and the soul food and all that like crazy shenanigans stuff in this one. But
Yeah.
yeah, this is where I put my Dream Master. All right, moving on through. This is number 5.
Yep. So then this is where I put my Dream Master.
These two are
And
back to
this,
back for you.
yeah.
One way or
So
the other, they're back to back.
they're always back to back somehow. So like I said, it's a fun sequel. I mean, like I said, Freddy was basically a rock star at this point, and we get these brand new characters. We have the older, the previous characters, and like I said, it has part 4 has one of my favorite death scenes, which is the kiss of death. And I thought that just always is such a nasty and just kind of this gets under your skin type of kill. Uh, so it was very imaginative with those kills. Like I said, Debbie's like I said, I couldn't eat the school cafeteria pizza after watching her death scene, and so it was just a good one in that regard. Um, and like I said, I like how Alice, went from meek to very strong by the end. She really kind of found herself, which and you can kind of see it. Some of the parts are where, like I said, even with the MTV Freddy, you can really see Alice growing in this film. It doesn't just happen like, well, where did that come from all of a sudden? I mean, you really see her. You know, it's like pretty much as the last of the Dream Warriors die, you just see her from that point, just basically just starting to just rise.
Okay, now it's my turn to break your heart.
Oh gosh.
Yep, at number 5, and it's just because of how strong I feel about these other ones at this point in my life. And I used to probably put this one at the top, but now I put it here, and that is the original Nightmare on Elm Street from '84. I,
What?
look, Heather Langenkamp's good. I don't think she's great in this though. Her performance is not great. The character's great, but her performance as a teenager is not great in this.
Ah.
Like I said, time for me to break your heart. I know.
Oh
I
my
know.
gosh, man. I kind of like gave you like a bandage and like a soda, but you just like stomped on me.
Hey, yep, that's where I'm at. That's where I stand. I know. I was finding it strange when I made these rankings myself, but I was like, I can't lie about it. Gotta just put it where I feel it goes.
Oh man. Whew. Nightmare community. I'm sorry I had to hear that. Oh man. Okay, let's just keep going. I got to get over this one. Oh man.
Yep, keep going.
All right. So my next one after 4 will be number 2. Um, like I said, I do enjoy it too. I told you I just felt like the story was a little, just a little imbalanced. I just wish it was more a little like cohesive. Had a little bit more structure to it. But even I mean, I loved that. Like I thought everybody did good in their roles. Like the acting was good. I thought like obviously Freddy was dark in that one. He was scary, and that plays a big part. And I really love the score to Nightmare 2. It's different from. It doesn't use any of like Charles Bernstein's original score like all the rest of the sequels do. It has its own. It's always its own little entity, like its own little bubble. Because it was the one that was really the most different. Because Freddy like really comes out in that one. At the pool party, and just those whale sounds of like just certain time when somebody's dying. It's like it's really unsettling. and it's something that can kind of get under your skin a little bit. So even with all those, like I said, some of those, things with the story, it does, it has a really haunting, factor to it. It's still very scary.
Yeah, I agree. I'll talk about it in a minute, but not yet. Because look, I'm gonna get it all out right here, right now. I got your one. I'm taking your other. That's New Nightmare. I think this is Heather's best performance overall, without a doubt. I definitely think that.
I do agree with that.
And I know we were discussing Scream pre-recording, and I said I think it's too long. This movie's too long. It doesn't need to be an hour and 50 minutes. You shorten that up, I'd probably raise it up higher, but I feel like it drags just a little bit because of that. I'd like to see some stuff shortened out. I'd have to go back and watch to see exactly what I'd cut, because I feel like you could cut some stuff though. Make this thing a little shorter. Let's bring it a little tighter.
It's elevated horror.
I don't like that term either. Not concerning to this. I don't like that term in general. Elevated horror.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds pretend like I see those memes like, do I watch some elevated horror or fuck it, I'm gonna watch Halloween 3 again, It's like
yeah, I only use it because I know it's just the thing that goes around now, but I don't when I'm just like when they're defining elevated horror, Wes Craven's New Nightmare would definitely fit in the elevated horror category.
I agree with that.
As they kind of come with it, now. I mean, even technically Psycho is elevated horror. I mean, if you're really trying to break it down like that, if they're going by what they're talking about,
Right. I can't disagree with any of that. So go ahead. What's your next? We're in top 3 now.
So top 3. So the next one is Nightmare 3. The Dream Warriors, which is a very, very strong sequel. I thought it was a great comeback sequel because, like I said, because coming off of part 2, which, like I said, needed a little bit more structure. Nightmare 3 had very good structure. It had very great characters. I thought everybody who was in their roles did amazing. All the teenagers. I mean, Jennifer Rubin as Taryn. I mean, she was amazing, and she was like 20. She was actually older than Heather in that movie. I mean, and you just bought her as a teenager, and she owned that part of this drug addict who was, dealing with this. And I mean, she was just so good. And, Ken Sago's playing Kincaid, and, Jennifer, I mean, everybody was just so good in their roles. I thought this film was so good. We learned a lot more about Freddy. We learned his mother, that turns out to be the nun that's been helping Neil Gordon this whole time. So it definitely raised the bar. Like I said, it was the first one that was very imaginative with the technical effects, just all the effects that were in it. Like I said, the early example of like these very hard effects, especially with the budget that they had, that they were able to come up with this stuff. Nightmare 3 is a very strong sequel, like a very strong sequel. I mean, and I can really understand why, like, a lot of fans will actually put number 3 over Nightmare 1. Like, I've seen that. Like, that's their favorite out of any Nightmare on Elm Street is part 3. And, I can really see it. There was something about the bonding of those teenagers that thing. I will say that's one thing about the Nightmare series. You don't have, like, the section where it's like, oh, you got the mean girls over here, or this jock is doing this or this and that. All the teenagers come together. With these slasher movies, with certain slasher movies or horror movies, you see like, oh, there's this group here, that. In the Nightmare movies, all the teenagers come together. Nobody's trying to, bash the other one or do this to this one or that. They all come together, which is something I always loved about the Elm Street franchise, which makes it, stand out more.
Okay. Now this one, I get it. Nightmare purists aren't gonna like this, but as a Jason guy, I like when Jason enters my Nightmare movie. And as I said, it's one of my favorite theatrical experiences ever. This is where I put my Freddy versus Jason. I debated putting this at number 1 just because this is probably the one I can rewatch the easiest and go back to, especially when you get to that end and they make it to Crystal Lake and they bring Freddy out into the real world. I can watch that any given time, any given day.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Definitely.
Top 10. Oh, here we go. Here we go. We've been waiting on this for months.
I don't think you're gonna like my answer. I'm okay. So everybody out there, when it comes to this part, it's been this way for me since I was 13 years old. That's why I want to put this in the context. So it's not like, well, why is he saying this? It's been this way for me for like 20 years. So A Nightmare on Elm Street and Wes Craven's New Nightmare are both my number one. I consider them. I can never like say when somebody asks me what my favorite horror movie is or my favorite movie in general, I always tell them A Nightmare on Elm Street and Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It's both, and it's I know it's so weird for a ranking because it's like where does a number two fit in? I'm like I'm like it's so hard for me because these two films they're just two masterpieces and not like I said, I fell in love with the original Nightmare when it first came out, and I fell in love with New Nightmare when it first came out. And those are the two when I first saw them that I had to keep watching them over and over again. Like I said, the original Nightmare, I watched that for days and weeks. And soon as like I saw New Nightmare, I rented at my cousin. Then the next time I went to the video store, I rented it, so I could watch it. And then when I was able to buy it, I bought that, like I said, Nightmare is the film that made me want to write, and New Nightmare brought the same thing out of me. I was like, I wanted I want to create something so magical and so creative that it just goes beyond the scope of what people are expecting or what they think. And I felt like these two films like did that, and they did that for me. So it's always hard for me to say, well, this is number one and this is number two. But I knew I was doing this show, so for the sake of the show, I would say New Nightmare as my number two, but only because it came later.
Oh man.
But I wanted to put all that in the context first so it would make sense.
Okay. Okay. As for my number two, and I used to not like this one that much. I mentioned it when we talked about it. Freddy's Revenge. I really came around a lot on this one.
Yeah.
I love the dark, scary Freddy. I
Mm-hmm.
love the pool stuff. I love how fast it goes. I get you're probably right. Probably could flesh it out more, but I love
Mm-hmm.
a short movie now. Something I can get in and out with. That's just like a dream come true for me these days. All right, so you mentioned it. That leaves the original as your favorite just because it came out first.
And it's my first horror movie.
Yeah,
And
that
first horror
helps, I
movie that
think.
I saw. Yeah, it's the first horror movie I ever saw. And it was my gateway into all other horror films. So that's the way if I could justify breaking it down, which is it like I get like, oh, I don't want to say it like that because like I love both of them, but if I can break them down that way so it can make more sense because I saw it first, it was the catalyst. I used Nancy Thompson as a template for my heroes and my heroines in my writing, and it was mostly due because of that first film. So when I say there was something that Will Smith said once. I heard him say this was years ago. He said that in his mind he's always chasing after Michael Jackson's Thriller. And I was like, I didn't understand that at first. When I first heard that, I was about maybe like 14 years old, 15. I hadn't really like written a book. I was mostly short stories. And I was like, what does he mean he's like chasing after that? I don't get it. And it wasn't until I was writing and I realized I was chasing after Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm looking to write a story that how that movie affected me, that I'm able to write something that can affect somebody in that way, or even more so, or get that, like I said, or get that same high in fear as that movie gave me. So I'm like constant. Every book I write, I'm constantly thinking about Nightmare on Elm Street. And I'll say now I understand what he's talking about, because Thriller is considered like one of the like the top music video ever made. Which of course I see that, of course. So I understand what he's saying now, older and having more experience in writing, what he meant in that way.
Okay. And you reference these people throughout. I'm one of those people, Dream Warriors. I just
Mm-hmm.
love this movie. I love the aspect of being able to pull other people into your dreams,
Yes.
going into other people's dreams. That's just a cool concept to introduce. I get what you're saying about Nancy's death, but I do like the fact that they brought her back for this one.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the kills. I mean, the tendon kill, like playing him like a puppet. Oh my goodness, it's just so awesome to watch from 1987. The big snake Freddy or whatever you want to call him that he when he's eating Kristen. I mean, it's just amazing stuff to look at. So yeah, Dream Warriors. I had the most fun watching this one.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a fun one. Like I said, it's kids in this situation and they literally become warriors.
Yep.
It's it's amazing. Like there was nothing really like Dream Warriors back then in the 80s, like that type of a sequel.
Right.
There was really nothing like that at that time, because nothing really, no other franchise could really be imaginative like Nightmare could. Even though Friday the 13th that turned into a supernatural series, it wasn't on the level of Nightmare on Elm Street. And Michael wasn't really in the 80s, and even if it was like that, there wouldn't be no way they could really do anything like that with a Halloween story.
No, I didn't fit that.
So Nightmare was very unique in being able to do that, and I think that's why it can be celebrated that way, but also in a way it's given it the most problems. And like the fact that because Robert's the only one that's played Freddy, so fans, they want Robert as Freddy. When it comes to Jason and Michael, anybody can be behind that mask. So Nightmares, I always look at it as this gem. It's like you have it, but it's hard to control it because there's so many different aspects to it that makes it more complex than yours. That's why I say it's not real a typical a typical slasher film, because it's so much more than that. Throwing somebody else behind the mask and the lever, like, oh, like this isn't really Freddy, but somebody can put on that Myers mask and just walk and just stab somebody and be like, oh, okay. I mean, that's what
Yep.
Michael does, or that's what Jason does. He can be behind
Right.
that. So it's Nightmare is just being in that stigma, being very complex, a very complex horror franchise.
So do you want to see Robert lace up the boots one more time, go under the makeup one more time?
I would love to see him do it one more time, because I mean it's been all about legacy characters, lately. We've seen it with Linda Hamilton returning, obviously Jamie Lee Curtis returning, Scream 5 cast returning. I mean, it's just legacy characters. And even in the new Texas Chainsaw, they brought Sally back, even though it wasn't Marilyn Burns because she passed away, but they brought that character back.
Yeah, I thought that was a mistake.
Yeah.
If you have the actress, I get it, but if you don't, just leave that storyline alone.
Yeah.
Don't try to capitalize off of it.
Yeah, I would have left it alone too. And
but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I would love to see him at least one more time, and then after that, I mean, I've surrendered to the fact that if we want more sequels, then we have to accept that somebody will have to be, wearing that glove. And the older I've gotten, I've just surrendered to that fact. I mean, we have to, But I would also love to have Heather come back as Nancy, to play that character again. I mean, we've seen all these heroines return. When is Nancy coming back? And to me, she's such a badass heroine. Like, we need that. We need her to come back. She shouldn't be put on the back burner. Somebody really needs to listen to the fans and what the fans are saying and bring this character back.
All right. So are there any favorite kills you want to mention?
Kills?
Yeah. Any favorite kills you want to talk about?
Well, I did. Well, like I said,
I know you mentioned the Kiss of Death one.
Sheila's Kiss of Death is definitely like one at the top. but I'll also say Tina from the first Nightmare. I mean, that whole, I mean, really just starting from when she opens that back door and is like, is anybody there? And then he's just calling her name, and then into that alley scene. That alley scene is what traumatized me the most watching Nightmare on Elm Street. Like anytime I would have nightmares about Nightmare on Elm Street as a kid, it always started with the alley scene. And even now, I don't really have like a lot of nightmares now. I think just being a horror fan, I'm just so desensitized. I just don't
Yeah,
I just don't have
I
nightmares
don't.
now. But when I randomly do have one about nightmare, which maybe like once a year or something, it's always the alley scene.
Oh, okay.
That alley scene really it it really left an imprint on me because it was horrifying as a kid. Like I said, 5 years old, and just you know her just being in that alley, and then him just coming up behind her with that silhouette, and then like his arms stretching out,
I was
and
going to
then
ask you, did he have the elongated arms in your nightmares?
in my nightmare, in my dream, no, the longer it was just it's just mostly just sometimes I'm like a watcher where I'm just seeing it happen. I start to in the dream in my own nightmare, I always feel like the sinking feeling because it's like I know what's gonna happen. And it's like the dream gets dark because I know like Freddy's coming in. It's like, oof, you know, there's something about that alley scene. It's like even because I actually got to go to that alley back in 2018 when we went on our California trip. We found the alley, and it really is behind the house that they use for Tina's house, and it's right there. And then just being back there, and it's like this is where it happened, and like we were imitating the arm stretch, and that alley looks way cleaner now than it did back then because Venice was known as the slums back in the 80s, so it was like kind of gritty, and like now that alley looks magnificent. Like I said, I feel like somebody could pitch a tent back here and live. Like it's so clean. but um but yeah, that scene in particular, and I would say Mark's death from part 5. I just always thought that was really great. I mean, because he was a comic book person, he turned into a comic strip, and he's like, basically slashed to death as a paper comic. It's just so really different and interesting. So I was kind of like, I would say those are probably like my top 3. Those 3: Tina, Sheila, and Mark's death are probably my top 3 deaths.
Okay, yeah, I definitely agree on Tina. I still love the Johnny Depp bed death where it eats him
Oh
alive.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that. But I think the one I really came around on, you had mentioned it when talking about it, was Carlos. When he gives him
oh
that
yeah,
really
with his
super
ear.
sensitive hearing and drops
Mm-hmm.
the pin, and then he drops all the pins so he can't catch him.
Right.
And then he goes to the nails on a chalkboard, and eventually it just gets
Oof.
so much it literally makes his head explode. I
Oh,
mean, it's just such a cool death. It's gruesome.
it is. He's tormented. I mean, I
Yeah,
mean, he's literally tormented in
he's
that.
playing with his food, if you will.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, I think that's gonna wrap it up. Let's tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find information on this Fred Heads once again. So in case they forgot, make sure everybody knows those good details.
All right. Well, you can always find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Um, just look for Anthony Brownlee. You typically always find me popping right up, always with something horror on the page. And with Fred Heads Doc, same thing. All you look is just for Fred Heads Doc on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll have updates. We'll have videos of showings. Any news coming up. We always post, so we always pretty much keep up with the information as we get information.
All right, sounds good. I'm personally hoping for a physical release. That's what I want to see.
Well, for that, all I can tell you all out there is stay tuned.
That's what I like to hear.
And that's where I'll leave it.
All right. And as always, you can follow the show at ynfmoviepod on Twitter and Instagram. Easiest thing, go to linktr.ee/ynfmoviepod. Find us social media platforms, podcast platforms, YouTube channel, which if you check this video out on YouTube, you will get to see a good display of Anthony's signed posters in the background of his video throughout the video. So yeah, he's got all those signed and looking nice. Yeah, see, there you go. So make sure you check this one out on YouTube. And next week, I think Chris will be joining the show to be talking about Rejuvenator, a lost horror gem from the 80s that I don't think a lot of people know about. And we'll keep the horror going, as at the end of the month, we'll have Blair Witch Project. I'm having Ed from the Film Effect podcast come on. And then going into November, Film Effect Vember, with the rest of his co-hosts join the show for the whole month of November, at least the first 4 weeks. So until then, you guys take care, and I will talk to you next time.